Purani ji, we are not taking, we have, I think, one paragraph. It comes in one of the essays, but few other writers, MP Pandit, and mother's conversation from agenda. So, yeah. Okay, great. So, yeah, so the seer, the rishi, is the natural director of society, which is why we had this parampara of Raj rishis in India. All kings used to have, you know, a rishi to refer to whenever there was a conflict, whenever there was an issue that they needed. So in the Ramayana, Valmiki Ramayana comes when Dashrath wants his son Ram to become the next king, or to announce that he is the now, you know, crown prince. He first invites Rishi Vashisht, who is the Raj Rishi, to ask whether that's the right thing to be done, and there is a whole conversation about that. And then the Raj Rishi suggests that let's call an assembly. How democratic. All the, you know, fiduciaries should come, and the courtly people will come and then decide. And then the announcement is made that Ram is now the Yuvraj. So Rishi is the natural director of society for the Indian mind. To rishis, he attributes the ideals and guiding institutions of his civilization. So Sri Aurobindo has written a lot of passages in some of his writings in the same volume, Foundations of Indian Culture, and elsewhere, also as rishi as the maker of Indian civilization. So he says, and then even today he's ready to, the Indian mind is ready to give the name, the title of rishi to anyone who can go beyond what is seen. So he says this particularly with reference to Bankim Chandra, where he says how he was channeling the rishihood when he came up with the slogan Bande Mataram. So things like that. Okay, so I don't know if it's visible, but just another beautiful sentence from the same essay where he describes the Indian believes why Indian mind would put rishi above all intellectual philosophers or all idealists even, because for the Indian mind, truths of the spirit are the ultimate truth. So he says the ultimate truths are truths of the spirit, and that truths of the spirit are the most fundamental and most effective truths of our existence. Powerfully creative of the inner, salutarily reformative of the outer life. So if we can grasp the truths of the spirit, we have the key to reform or beautify or harmonize the outer life as well, which is what the Indian mind believes, which is why rishi in the Indian outer societal framework was considered outside of the Chaturvarna. Rishi could have come from any background. Both our Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are the works of two rishis who were born in what today would be understood as depressed classes in Indian constitution, or in, you know, the scheduled castes, Valmiki and Vyas. They were both of very low parentage, and yet Indian mind gave them the status of rishi. That's the beauty, because truths of the spirit are to the Indian mind ultimate. And these people have they have perfected themselves, the rishis have perfected themselves to hear and see the truth. Satya Drishta and Satya Shrota. But to the European, again, it's not just about, you know, the body, the European body or the European geography, but to more of a rationalistic, materialistic view. Ultimate truths are often the truths of the highest intellect, the ideative, where the pure ideas come from. And yet, that's the philosophy, the highest philosophy would be. And yet he would say these truths are nothing to do with my outer practical life. And they use, Sri Aurobindo used the word that they say these are tests of values. Will it help me have a better life? Will it help me get a better microwave? Things like that, you know, just simple things like, my husband often says, we have had so much advanced technology and yet we haven't figured out, you know how the setting on your bread toaster, you can't figure it out how exact brown you want. So this is the imprecision, because we are just working through matter. So that's one of his complaints for the rationalistic critic. So the average, remember we are talking of the averaged positivist mind. So the averaged positivist mind, not the cultured mind. Again, the systematic writer Sri Aurobindo, he pulls out three things. For this kind of mind, what is the one problem that they have with Indian psychology? It's a jungle of self-hypnotic hallucinations. Look at he's a poet when writing prose. Indian religion, one problem with Indian religion, a rank growth of anti-rational superstitions. Everything comes. These are the criticism. And all that is wrong with Indian philosophy, it's a remote cloud land of unsubstantial speculation. You see, I'm so happy actually he didn't revise these essays, because he might have taken out these, wonderful expressions. So this is the, I can just stop here. We can have a discussion just about all this. But Sri Aurobindo continues. So he says, for example, what we think of spirituality is that this is something beyond the outer mental, vital nature, something supra-rational. But for the rationalist, he doesn't understand spirit in this sense, because for him or her, there is something called as God, but that God is what? Life, human will force, and reason. These are their Godheads, nothing beyond that. So, can there be anything beyond outer mental nature that we understand? For them, it doesn't exist. I'll go a little bit deeper into the criticism that the rationalistic mind has for Indian philosophy, and I'll skip the religion part. Maybe it will come later through the discussion also. But for the Indian philosophy, it turns away from life, nature, and the will of the human being to do something meaningful with his life or her life, because he's always looking at, what is Brahman? And, all that stuff. And Sri Aurobindo will, he gives examples actually to refute all these claims, but in the interest of time, I'm not going there, but I will encourage you all to really read those examples that he gives. The second criticism of Indian philosophy is that it preaches the unreality of the world. And it brings in all kinds of things like, karma, reincarnation, pessimism, asceticism, and that's why it has nothing to do with life. These are all ideas which the rationalistic mind will say are fatal to individuality. So while the rationalistic mind is so much about forming a personality, the Indian mind is about impersonality or transcending the personality. So that's why it's not connected with life, as per the rationalistic critic. It also emphasizes detachment from terrestrial interests. And Sri Aurobindo challenges that, how can it, preach detachment from terrestrial interest? Because most of the Indian literature, especially in Sanskrit, is about very practical aspects of life. And he gives particularly the example of Shukraniti. Shukra Rishi was the teacher of the Asuras in some of the Puranic stories. And he gave a theory of politics and economics, which again, very practical. So he just gives one example. We are a land of where all kinds of literature, from Kama Shastra to Arth Shastra to, warfare, everything is there. Hardly 15 to 20% of the entire body of Sanskrit literature today that we have has to do with philosophy actually. Most of it is very other aspects of life. So that's the example Sri Aurobindo gives. So right here he says, so the criticism is that Indian philosophy turns you away from study of nature as well as life. Study of nature, he says, it's a gross misrepresentation, and the only way we can accept it is if you ignore the entire history of Indian civilization. How the heck would we build these grand architectural marvels if we didn't know engineering, if we didn't know mathematics, if we didn't know geography? if that is what is understood by the study of nature. And then another important point Sri Aurobindo reminds us there is that we in India, especially in ancient and maybe up to a large extent in the medieval India, Indian mind was so keen on developing, systemizing knowledge. Hence, we even came up with a word called Shastra, which means a compendium of things, compendium of knowledge. So for each aspect of life, we had a Shastra, to the extent that we even had Shastra on wine making, horse breeding. So if we had all this, how could we be removed from study of nature? So that, he says, that itself is one proof on cultivation of scientific mind, scientific tendency. And then Sri Aurobindo builds a whole other case about how we were, so high up in mathematics, astronomy, trigonometry, the yagyashalas that were made with exact precision, exact geometrical precision. And there is a lot of research now for anybody who cares to look. And Sri Aurobindo says this, I'm not saying it. Anybody who wants to look through the historical documents, how India had attained so much in all outer life as well, in science and things like that. Surgery, of course, like we know, Ayurveda. The other criticism that Indian philosophy has nothing much to do with life, there Sri Aurobindo reminds us of the 4 Purusharthas. The very fact all of Indian life was organized around these aims of life, which the fourfold is the Kama, Artha, Dharma and Moksha. And some philosophers or some historians say that Moksha was added on a little later on, especially after the Buddhist advent. But earlier it was Kama, Artha and Dharma. Dharma has to be the basis, and on the basis of Dharma, pursuit of all kinds of sensual, physical satisfaction, aesthetic satisfaction, which is Kama, and pursuit of material well-being, which is Artha. So I always like to say, India was not invaded for its spiritual riches, India was invaded for its material riches. So we had to have that kind of material riches for all these invasions to happen. And as I said, the Indian literature itself is a proof that anybody who bothers to look at the body of Indian literature will find how closely connected with life it was. The Indian mind, in terms of organizing life and understanding the value of life and how life affirming it was, it recognized all human possibilities, even though it valued the spiritual aspiration as the highest. But it recognized that everybody has to walk in a certain gradual way. So the idea of graduality and gradual progress was very much understood by the Indian rishis. So they tried to come up with a system, a social organization, where people were divided into 4 broad classes. And when Sri Aurobindo describes this in the last essay in the series, he goes into greater detail about this Chaturvarna as to how these 4 classes are basically about the 4 key turnings of the soul towards 4 kinds of pursuits. So the Brahmin soul would be one that is more turned towards pursuit of knowledge, wisdom. The Kshatriya soul would be one that is more turned towards pursuit of power and courage. So on. The Vaishya would be more towards outer harmony and material well-being. That's the Vaishya. And the Shudra would be the outer perfection, the outer execution of details, in detail, and to offer service. So Sri Aurobindo has talked about that in great detail. But to all of these classes, people of all of these temperaments, the final ascent into Godhead was guaranteed. The whole education system was set up in a way where all these temperaments will be addressed. Proper ethical training will be given. So all of this was part of the body aspect of the culture, how the things were set up. Moving right along. As I said earlier, it's always given the highest value to that which rises beyond the all the terrestrial, earthly occupation. I think I've already talked about that a little bit. So again, he summarizes this, that the difference, what we find between the typical Western or the rational or the typical Indian mentality is this. The West has acquired religion mind, has acquired the religious mind. It's not possessed it by its own nature, whereas for the Indian, it's a very natural, organic way, because religious mind comes from its highest, what it values the highest, which is the spirit. So the India has constantly believed that there is a world, or rather worlds beyond the earthly world, the terrestrial world that we see it. So it's a very natural possession that there is something beyond. But for the Western mind or for the rationalistic mind, there is nothing beyond what we see. So you know the phrase, what you see is what you get, exactly comes from that. First time I heard somebody even used an acronym, YZWIG. I said, what does that mean? What you see is what you get. That's just a very limited way of looking at life. Again, another reminder, Sri Aurobindo, in a very beautiful circular way, keeps on reminding various truths again and again, that at its highest, from the Vedic Upanishadic time, since then Indian spirituality has never been about a quiet monastic approach to spirit. It's been always very life-affirming. As I said, the rishis themselves were living a full household life. So it's been a high effort of the human spirit to rise beyond the life of desire and vital satisfaction and arrive at spiritual calm, greatness, strength, illumination. I think I've already covered this. This is where I think, Uma's, your question would come in. We'll take that up a little bit later. Indian religion is Indian spiritual philosophy put into action and experience. So that's where he says, just this one line from it, it's the philosophy put into practice. So another place, in another essay, Sri Aurobindo writes, it's the Indian religion is dynamic philosophy. It's dynamized by the philosophy, or sorry, Indian philosophy is dynamized by religion, and Indian religion is philosophized by the highest spiritual thought. So the religion and philosophy are not two different things. And then he reminds us, you know, the Sanatan Dharma, which goes by the name of Hinduism today, as one of the most tolerant and inclusive. It has taken in philosophical thought, understandings of life from all various traditions. And in fact, in the same series of essays, Sri Aurobindo makes a very important statement, which I think really need to be looked at in much greater detail, where he says it very clearly and categorically. This Sanatan Dharma or Hinduism would have taken in its fold even religions such as Islam and Christianity if they had tolerated the process of assimilation. It's a statement worth really deep reflection. So, so the tolerant, the assimilative nature of Sanatan Dharma, Sri Aurobindo spends time describing, and again he gives many examples of that. This is the criticism on the Indian religion part. So yeah, another criticism that the rationalistic critic has is that oh, Indian religion is always thinking, or Indian philosophy is always talking about something unknowable. So Sri Aurobindo says, yeah, it admits that unknowable and unthinkable, anirvachaniye, about whom you cannot speak. And yet, its concern is about that which you can speak, which you can attain. That is where the religion comes in. So you cannot attain Brahman in one go, and yet you can become a beautiful soul that is completely devoted to one chosen form of divine, your Ishtadev, the one that your soul chooses. So it gives you a very practical way. For Meera, it was only Krishna. So when Meera writes to, there is a story, when Meera writes to Tulsidas that my in-laws' family is, you know, doing all kinds of torture and I can't live. They don't see Krishna as the divine that he is. And, you know, they don't want me to worship or pray or devote, stay as a devotee. Or for her, it was actually, she was the wife of Krishna, right? Or to be married to my Krishna. What should I do? Tulsidas writes in a beautiful chaupai, he says, I could not live where my Ram is not being accepted. For him, it is Ram, right? She writes about Krishna, he writes about Ram. Then Meera goes to Kashi, where Tulsidas ji is. Then Meera goes to see Kabir, for whom it is Ram throughout. Meera asks Kabir, you give me Ram Bhakti. I want to love Ram the way I love Krishna. And Kabir says, I am not the guru for you. You go to this person named Ravidas, who is a shoemaker. He works with leather. So she goes to Ravidas, a little outside of where Kabir was, a little farther away. And Ravidas comes from a very low caste, and he says, no, you're a princess. I cannot be your guru. And then she says, no, but Kabirji has sent me. Oh, Kabirji is like my older brother. So, yeah, you're my guru. And it's in Kashi. Mirabai writes that beautiful song, Payo ji maine Ram Ratan Dhan Payo. And throughout her life, she's a Krishna Bhakt, married to Krishna. For her, it's all Krishna. Mere to Girdhar Gopal. So, you cannot attain Brahman, but she merged into Krishna. Andal merged into Ranganatha, right? So through religion, through that kind of devotion, the practical things. So Sri Aurobindo says Indian philosophy admits that there is something unknowable, and yet it is concerned with what is knowable and what is attainable. So that's where the dynamic aspect of spirituality comes in. And then Indian philosophy, also because it's not speculation, it says very boldly, you want to attain the level where I am at, follow the path. Path of karma, path of dhyana, path of bhakti. Follow the path, you will have the experience. It's a verifiable, it's as scientific as it can be, except that this is psychological subjective science. This is not a physical science. So that's something beautiful we find from Sri Aurobindo. I think I've already talked about these things. For the rationalistic mind, there are two cults, cult of life, cult of reason, which has given two godheads, industrialism, industrial rational progress, and physical science. And then Sri Aurobindo explains in a beautiful paragraph, which I think all our politicians should read, where why they talk about Indian unity. Often the unity is about whether India is a secular state or not, Hindus, Muslims. Sri Aurobindo speaks about how when a culture only looks at these two things, life and reason, the tendency to secularize everything is a natural consequence of that. And in the interest of time, I'm not going into detail of that, but he explains this beautifully. But a culture that begins with spirit as the fundamental truth, since spirit is not separate from life, the essential aspect of religion is also not cut off from life. So the whole debate about secularism can be resolved if we can have like a round table conference with all the politicians and policymakers and just have 2 days, just work on that one paragraph and come up with some policy guidelines from that. So that's a necessary consequence of the cult of life and reason, which is not the case with a culture like India. So naturally, when such a mind looks at all the chaos, so-called, seeming chaos of Hinduism or Indian spirituality in practice, it is a little bewildered, it is a little disgusted, even astonished, and Sri Aurobindo recognizes that how can, we have given up all these superstitions, you people are still following it, You go to places like Kashi, Haridwar, Rishikesh, these are places booming with practices that have been there since 5,000 years or more. So people are experiencing truth through these outer practices. So the Western temperament often gets, I think I'm just going to skip a little bit because these are things that I've already spoken of. The Western temperament always emphasizes the action. For the Indian mind, for the Indian spiritual view of life, Action is important, but the highest is the sattvic poise, where action is done in the poise of that harmony, in the sattva. Yeah, so I don't know if you can see this image of Krishna and Kali. There are stories about Radha, how there was how Radha used to go at the call of Krishna's flute every time. And one time at night, she heard the flute and she went, and all the gopis also went, and their husbands realized that something is wrong. Where have all our wives gone? So they followed her, and then Radha says, we have to do something. So Krishna turns into Kali. So he said, yeah, we are here, all the women are here for Kali worship. So no, nothing like that going on. But Sri Aurobindo actually, from a yogic point, he really takes this idea of Krishna and Kali. There was time he used to sign as Kali. So he speaks of his yoga, his integral yoga is bringing the two powers of Krishna and Kali together. So Krishna, the Anandamaya, and Kali, the force, the courage. As Sri Aurobindo says, love and courage are the only two virtues that will save the soul, even if everything is lost. So love is Krishna and courage is Kali. Sri Aurobindo gives a very interesting and long discussion on how, for the rationalistic critic, Indian philosophy and Indian religion do not talk about ethics. And there is one line of Sri Aurobindo says, if there is anything that Indian mind has been concerned about other than spirit, is dharma. But for the rationalistic mind to understand what is dharma, it's a long inner and outer study. So dharma goes beyond ethics. So he gives a very interesting analysis of that. And there's just one example I've pulled out from that, where he speaks of relative standards, which the typical rationalistic mind will not understand. If it's non-violence all the way. And Sri Aurobindo says, for a Kshatriya, non-violence does not make sense. Yes, ahimsa paramo dharma, and yet a warrior has to be trained in all kinds of violence. In Mother's Conversations, you find out long, very interesting discussion about teaching peace to children, or even, she says her own example, how she learned fencing, and how that learning martial arts, learning arts of warriors can be a very good physical discipline. So Sri Aurobindo speaks of the relative standards of Indian ethics. So again, he brings us to some questions. He is an academic throughout, so he'll ask us questions. Having said all this, having said that Indian culture values all these high things that are beyond terrestrial occupations, does it have some connection with the daily life, the outer life? And for that, so I'll just read what he said. Apart from its transcendental aims, has it any pragmatic, non-ascetic, dynamic value? If so, then only it is worth preserving. He'd say it very clearly, very categorically. And then he tells us how to judge that. There are three powers that we can have to judge the life value of a culture. What was its original conception of life? For India, it was spirit as the ultimate truth, everything else as an expression of that. The power of forms, rhythms that it created to express that original conception of life, and the inspiration, the vigor with which it executed those forms. And if we have the same vigor and the same power today to execute those truths, because that's where the Renaissance in India will come about. The new birth will come about. So there I've just summarized what is the life value of Indian culture, and I think I already referred to it in a little bit, where he says that the Indian mind show a great spiritual tact. That's the word he uses. He says, yes, everybody has to become God. India recognizes that. But you're not going to become God just like that. You have to go through a proper gradual progress. So that approach to the spirit does not and cannot be sudden and simple. It has to be a gradual culture, gradual training. That's where the whole, how we had this organization of life in 4 stages: brahmacharya, grahasth, vanprasth, sannyas, the 4 stages of life. So grahasth, the stage of a householder, Mahabharata says very clearly it's the most important stage in one's life to grow inwardly and outwardly. But at every moment, while going through all these stages, at every moment, the culture insisted of something beyond. That's why we had, a grahasth had to do so many yagnas, had to do so much dana, had to constantly invoke divine at the start of every ritual, every work. A child is born or a woman is pregnant, invoke the divine. Or a woman is even wanting to become pregnant, invoke the divine. Our prenatal, the whole sanskaras for before conception of child, all that. So at every stage, insistence of something beyond. That's how you keep them tuned into the spirit while going through life. And for masses, this has to be given in the form of a religion. Again, going back to your question, Uma. So for few who have attained an inner training from maybe their previous samskaras, their previous lives preparation. And that's why I think Sri Aurobindo says in another previous essay, for us reincarnation is not only about reward, it is also about what we do today to make our future life easier. So the experiences that we gain, the one our psychic assimilates at the start of a new life, the more inner life we pursue today is, we are closer in the training for going to the spirit a little faster. But for a large majority, it's through the religion that we get. And then another Indian concept that is very important, and that again is very unique to Indian way of looking at spiritual or religio-spiritual progress, is the concept of adhikar. Adhikar does not mean right, as our Manav Adhikar Samiti says. Adhikar basically means capacity. Are you capable of pursuing this path? The higher your adhikara, the more challenges that you get. In fact, as Mother said, the difficulties come more to the people who are ready to face those challenges. It's a pretty common wisdom in Indian households also, They say that, I've heard this many times growing up, when your life is going very smooth, everything comfortable, God's drishti is not on you. It's actually just turned away from you. Only when you get challenges in life, God is watching how you overcome these challenges so that you progress, you grow through them. So the higher the capacity, the higher the capability, the higher are the challenges given. So adhikara is the varying natural capacity. So those who are ready to become Meera are given that kind of life so that one grows into Meera consciousness. Those who don't have the adhikara yet, there are maybe other approaches. So this is the dynamic formulation. And again, as I said earlier, through all parts of the being we can grow. This is where Sri Aurobindo's integral yoga fits in so beautifully with the spirit of Indian culture. You are a person more working with your mind. Through mind, grow in perfection. You are a person more working from your vital, aesthetic, heart center. Become an artist, grow in yoga through your art. You are more of an action, the Karma Yoga Marg is open for you. All kinds of things. You are more of an ethical kind of pursuit, person, the good, the right. Grow through that, go beyond that. Aesthetic, through all these paths. And then if you are more of a bhakti temperament, more of a lover of higher, force, higher power, grow in bhakti. So all kinds of paths are given for you to grow so that eventually you go into what the Indian philosophy puts. Sri Aurobindo at one place says there are 3 things India has given to the world which science has failed. And in those three things, I love this three thing he says. All answers are there. Brahman, yoga, and dharma. Everything is rationalistic critic can be, addressed. Again, three, Sri Aurobindo defines, as he comes closer to, these series of essays, he speaks of the three broad stages of Indian civilization. The highest one, or the first one, being the Vedic Upanishadic, where there was quite a loose, free-spirited inquiry into the highest realms of the spirit. And then there came a stage of more fixity, more formulation. So that's first is the age of the spirit, then it's the age of dharma and shastra, where things become more systemized. And eventually, as happens with all civilizations, there becomes, more and more fixity and decay sets in. So India, he says, is presently going through this critical period of decay and disintegration. And it's up to us to see whether we can use this period of decay and disintegration to rise into the next Renaissance. That's why he titled his book is titled Renaissance in India. And going back to what we started, the theory of cultural criticism, cross-cultural studies that Sri Aurobindo gives, that you cannot judge any culture by just looking at the body and looking at when it's down, when its civilization is down. So all these studies, that whether it was William Archer or many others, starting from Max Muller's look at Veda, the Indology, the whole field of Indian studies that started, it happened at the time when Indian civilization was going through that third phase, where it was already, in a period of decay, disintegration, tiredness, having suffered a long hundreds of years of invasion before that. And it had gone into a mold of self-preservation, very closed, inward, inner, in. And yet, all these theories came about how India is a pessimistic, ascetic, navel-gazing culture because of that. And it was done to show that the Western, like I said, William Archer's political objective was very clear. Sri Aurobindo could immediately catch on that. He said it was done to show that because West is rich, it's the Western way that is the right way to take humanity further. Hence the idea of development, all of that, that even India, caught on to that after independence and things like that. A culture, if you have to judge a culture, judge by these three things. Again, three. What are these three things? See, he's such a systematic, organized writer. First, by its essential spirit. Second, by its best accomplishment. And third, by its power of survival, renovation, and adaptation. This is the third where we are at. We have to look at how quickly we can renew, or how meaningfully, rather, not quickly is not the right word, how meaningfully and harmoniously we can readapt and renew that essential spirit in new forms. So just one example, Sri Aurobindo says, Chaturvarna had its truth, but the integral age demands an integration of all four turnings of the soul. So the Brahmin also has to know what it's to be like Kshatriya. The Kshatriya also has to know what it's to be like Vaishya, and so on, because that's the need of the future humanity. So the old was gold, and yet we have to take what is there and put it in a new form for the future. So do not judge a culture when it's in a state of poverty, confusion, disorganization, or temporary decline. I mean, really a wonderful model of cross-cultural studies is there in these essays. And as I said in the beginning, it is all about Sri Aurobindo's vision for the third dream, the future of humanity, where these two major blocks of humanity, which have for so long misunderstood each other, if they have to be brought together, that's this kind of cross-cultural study is needed, because as Sri Aurobindo says, the two continents, I have the quote right here, the two continents, I mean, I guess you can call it just East and West, are two sides of the integral orb of humanity, and until they meet and fuse, each must move to whatever progress or culmination the spirit in humanity seeks by the law of its being, its own proper dharma. West need not become East, East need not become West. They have to pursue their own dharma, because a one-sided world would have been the poorer for its uniformity. We want unity, we don't want uniformity. So even if India has a huge, rich diversity, each diverse group has to pursue its own, first seek, identify its essence, its dharma, and progress in its own dharma to keep the Indian unity richer, diverse. Diversity in oneness, as Sri Aurobindo titles a chapter in Ideal of Human Unity. Oneness need not be a monotonic thing. Unity need not be a uniformity. But the richness, the diversity has to be there. Because a one-sided world would be a loss for the entire humanity. So this is where, Sri Aurobindo's third dream would come in. And again, he ends up with a question. So the question that he sets up, he gives us to reflect upon is, which way do you want to go? All that he's described about the culture of India, or the vehement secular activism of the modern mind? This is his phrase. The vehement secular activism of the modern mind, which wants to create an upheaval and, kind of like in a spirit of revolt, let go of all the truths of the spirit, which was the age of rationality. He said it was the age of revolt. The Western Renaissance, the Western Enlightenment was born in an age of revolt. The Indian Renaissance has to be born in an age of harmony and unity. Unity and diversity. So the question is, which way you want to go? And if it is, first, if you think it's the Indian culture, you have to ask the second question, that this Indian religio-philosophical spiritual view of life, is it going to be available only to the rare few? Or does it have to be universalized? Or has it to become more of a mass movement, which is where we are heading? The truth of the Veda that was, or the secret of the Veda that was reserved for a few, came down in the form of legends and stories through Ramayana and Mahabharats and Puranas and the Bhakti movement. It became more and more universal. Now Sri Aurobindo's concern is not just the mind and the heart, which were taken care of by these two stages. Now the outer life has to be divinized. So that means the truths of the spirit have to be universalized, which is where all life is yoga comes in. The entire life has to be divinized, and the truth of the Indian culture, or the truth of the religious, spiritual, philosophic view of life has to become, I guess we can say, has to become universal, has to be given to masses. So no more that this is only for the few initiates, but it has to be a universal spirituality. So this, in a sense, is the 6 essays, a rationalistic critic on Indian culture. I think I have taken way too long, but I couldn't have summarized, more than this. Thank you. So. And we have recording will be shared with people. Yes. Why there such high truths about spirituality in India? In spite of that, our politicians have already. She wants you to just. But I think, Uma, your question has been more or less addressed. He gave me the permission to go on, so I just kept going. I thought I'll cut it out. I can listen to you all day. No, it's just like, you can read these essays again and again, and still you find you have missed out. And there is a lot I have left out, lot.
Hello. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for this beautiful presentation. You felt it was too long. I thought it was too short.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So, yeah, I have few points to kind of explore further. And is there something that you wanted to say, Devasmita, before you forget? You want to? Would you like to speak?
Sure.
Come over here so that you
can. Towards the end, you spoke about how high and deep is our spirituality. And usually we Indians are very religious. And for me, when we are spiritual, we grow towards a unity, harmony, without division. And why our politicians are making our India divided through the different religions? How do you say? Means they speak about, they are putting Sri Aurobindo on a pedestal, and yet practically they are not following what he wants, that we go beyond these divisions of religions and we come to something much higher than what we are doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the, as they say, $1 million question or a $1 billion question. And it connects very well with how you started with the first dream of Sri Aurobindo. So as Sri Aurobindo recognizes that for the large number of masses, it's still going to be religion that will give them the first approach to the spirit, right? Mother has said the age of religions is over. That is fundamentally true. And yet it is probably, it's a truth of the future world or a subtle world which has yet to materialize in the reality in which we live today. I will not touch about why politicians do that, because I think there is a lot of agenda there, certain agendas that are at work there. But because Sri Aurobindo speaks very specifically of the communal division, the old communal division between Hindus and Muslims, which he says has now been somewhat considered settled with India and Pakistan. That, I think, was one fundamental wrong decision that was taken to accept this. In fact, even before that, when you read Sri Aurobindo's writings in Bande Mataram, when this idea was floated about caste representation, and I'm still talking when India was not free, still under British rule, as a result of all the pleading by the then Congress, certain things were given. One was that each caste would have a representation in whatever their committees. British people had, the British Raj had created committees for the natives so that their voice will be represented. Sri Aurobindo objected to that caste-based representation, you are accepting the fact that only a person of my caste can represent my interest. Same thing he spoke about religion-based representation, or giving favors on the basis of which religious background. So this divide and rule policy that was very much agenda driven by the British, our politicians of that time somehow accepted that as a given. And the policies that were put in place from 1947 onwards were more about appeasing certain groups rather than looking at the needs of people, as human beings. Their needs or their shortcomings are not coming because of their religious background. But religion became the marker of one's identity, and policies were framed around that. And that has been continuing. So it's terrible.
Why we need to do that? We are first of all human being, and if we cut Muslim or Christian or any religion, we'll have blood and bones and everything. So how they can make such a big deal out
Yeah. So the thing is that as I'm just going to take Sri Aurobindo's, the way he explains in a much deeper way. He says harmony or unity cannot be there on the basis of falsehood. Some truth has to be established. Even South Africa, when it went through its own turmoil, you know, they had to set up these truth and reconciliation. So it's not the problem that we don't have problems between Hindus and Muslims, but they have to be first dealt with in truth, not in appeasement, not in giving, you know, a little bit, like throw something out and keep them quiet, because it will stir up again. So the whole thing about partition, why it was accepted that people of a certain religion cannot coexist in one nation, under one government, with people of another religion. Why it was accepted. That's what Sri Aurobindo says, it is a complete falsehood. This falsehood, Pakistan was born in falsehood, and that's why it's always going to struggle to find its, not just nation soul, because soul does not exist in falsehood, even national identity. And we see this happening, right? So in some ways, his first dream has an answer to the inner conflict between Hindus and Muslims also. So Sri Aurobindo says this, I hope it is not considered as a settled fact. So a lot of it is like, you know, there is a lot of interference from Pakistani establishment in stirring up Indian Muslims. But the enlightened Indian Muslim would always give allegiance to Bharat Bhumi as their, you know, as their Karma Bhumi and Dharma Bhumi and Punya Bhumi. But for a certain Muslim mind, that's not the case. So there are many layers to this thing. And all of this has to be discussed in truth.
Yet through culture, in the art field, artistic field, it goes so much beyond.
Yes,
Ravi Shankar's guru was
allowed, absolutely.
Not a single artist can name.
You have to,
Yeah.
if you have to comment that so
Yeah.
that it's recorded, no, otherwise.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'll just
If
tell
you
you.
may repeat the question.
Okay, so her question was that in art, one can really transcend this. So like
Yes.
Pandit Ravi Shankar's guru and so many other stories like that. The Hindustani music is a perfect example of bringing the two together. And there is actually a pretty...
Cinema, Indian cinema is also...
Indian cinema. There is a video that has gone viral. Zakir Hussain, Ustad Zakir Hussain Khan, he's speaking about when he was born. The first words, you know, in Muslim families, the culture is that you have to speak some prayer in the ear of the newborn. And so his father, Allah Rakha, Ustad Allah Rakha comes and he plays rhythm. And his mother is angry. Why are you doing this? You are supposed to recite prayers in the new baby's ears. He says, these are my prayers. I am a devotee of Saraswati. I am a devotee of Lord Ganesha. This music is my prayer. So he says, music has a way to bridge cultures. So high art, that common action that Lakshay you speak about, by practice of common action, unity can come about. So we are not confined in our, you know, identities in which we were born. The attempt has to be about transcending that. Take the truth and transcend.
Okay. So I have a few other questions, but because there is already a line of thought here. If I may add, you spoke about this truth commissions in South Africa, right? After independence, we never had any such truth commission, reconciliation commission. So we just went about our life as if nothing happened.
Yes.
So how did that affect the psyche of an Indian mind or Indian culture? Do you think it's high time, even after now, last year, our Prime Minister spoke about decolonization of Indian minds. It's far beyond changing few chapters, and the wound is deeper.
Yes.
And the ointment cannot be superficial, no?
True.
So do you have any thoughts on that?
My thoughts are again just coming from Sri Aurobindo and the mother. Like, I don't know whether, I recently met with a couple of South African women who came to Aurobindo Society, and we talked about this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and their opinion is, their view is also that it was much better on paper than on ground.
Right.
So still a lot of fissures exist, a lot of conflicts are there. And yet there is somehow, the fact that there is a commission like that, or there were attempts like that, I don't know the word is sponsored or at least encouraged by the state, says, puts the right emphasis that it has to be, a conversation in truth. It cannot be just, band-aid kind of things, like what you're saying, removing chapters or adding new things. Because often what the attempt is that, okay, you want to take out, if I can be just very candid, take out the chapters of Mughal history.
Correct.
And put in certain,
Shivaji.
ancient Indian, Shivaji or Rana Pratap or things like that. That's not just going to cut it. It's like replacing one with the other. You have to put both of them in a context.
Correct.
So that the person can see, the student can see where the two meet and what is true, what is falsehood. The other thing is that, which I think a lot of this kind of thing happened, was to somehow keep the burden of the past onto the shoulders of the present generation. Right? So today's Indian Muslim has nothing to do with what Aurangzeb did. And yet, by reminding him again and again that, you are a descendant of that, you are actually creating division in his own mind, a conflict in his own mind. So today, if I have to meet with a person of a different faith, different background, I will meet with the person of today's time with his or her own mental, emotional baggage rather than the baggage of the history, right? So decolonization does not mean replacing one side of the history with the other. It means to actually give us tools to transcend the prison of the history. That's the phrase Mahabharata uses. History can be a prison also. So I think we have to keep remembering what Sri Aurobindo says, especially people who are drawn to his teachings, that we have to look to the noons of the future. Keep the truth, but move beyond.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the whole idea of this invocation, is to see how Sri Aurobindo's words can be used in a contemporary, understood in a contemporary sense.
Yes.
So you refer to something called age of revolt versus age of harmony.
Yeah.
So what you are saying, even if it's an anti, say, past movement to correct things, it's a form of revolt.
Yes, you can say that. Yeah, it can be a first step, but it cannot be the final
So
step.
that's not harmonious in any way, because it will further create fissures instead of
Yes.
unity, right?
Yes, it can. But as a corrective, it may be needed for a time. See, this harmony is not going to be created in
Isolation.
an isolation of the
True.
context. So if for 75, 76 years, and still, moving further down past, if it's been there, it's going to take a long time to nurse the wounds, if you will.
Correct. Like you
to
said,
heal the wounds.
to give a context and put
Yes.
things in perspective per se,
Yeah.
and leave it upon the intelligence of people to make sense of what it is, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
there is no one truth as per se anyway.
Right, and at the same time, I think that's where the new education policy and all these things become so important if they are done the right way. Right now, it's more of a document. So there is no point discussing much of the worth of the document until it is implemented. And teacher education, for example, how do you train teachers to encourage students to debate these points in a refined, rational way, rather than taking things too personally? Going back to what Sri Aurobindo said, he looked at William Archer's criticism, which was so vitriolic, and yet he found so much good to respond to by keeping his personal feelings aside. That's why I emphasize that point, that you have to keep your personal prejudices aside to look at most uncomfortable things and work from there. So a lot of it is psychological training. How do you train teachers to do that? At least the policy document that I have read doesn't talk about it. So there are gaps like that. We have a
Correct.
long way to go.
So, sticking to the topic, rationalistic critique of Indian culture, if we have to do that in present day's context, how well equipped are we to critique our own wrongs? It's one thing to glorify all goods, It's wonderful. We can be proud of it, and we should be proud of it.
Yeah.
However, how do we look at the ills and perils of a society like corruption?
Yes.
Corruption which emerges out of the numbers that we have. People vying for limited sources, which kind of instead of abundance we have scarcity, and that induces corruption. And then there is nepotism, and then there is this. You also alluded to appeasement for political reasons. So how do we not make this as a norm of Indian culture? That, like many people, that, if you have to get some things done, pay under the table is a culture.
Right.
Correct?
Right. Yes.
So how do we have become very comfortable with it? Like coming late is an Indian culture. We call it Indian Standard Time.
Yeah.
So this has become a normal,
Right.
a new normal. And how do we not make it acceptable?
By not doing it. It has to start from the individual. See, these are the aspects of the body. The way, I think that's where Sri Aurobindo's definition of culture becomes very important. These are the problems in our outer material setup that we have created, like not coming on time, not waiting in proper queues. I don't know, I just wonder how come we are so disciplined when we are at the airport waiting for security check-in. We do it in queues. You go to any railway station, it's all dhakka-mukki. Everybody's like, why is it? We drive in lanes when we go and live abroad, but we don't do that here.
Yeah.
So it's the same person who will do,
Very strange. The metro is clean, but the train is not.
Exactly, Even metro is often not clean.
Okay.
Some places, but you'd go to Kashmiri Gate and, crowded places. So there is a number issue. But these are the problems at the body level of culture. So I think from a Sri Aurobindonian point of view, we could say that we individually first have to look at, is the aim that I'm putting for my life to grow in spirit? If it is so, can I start expressing that in the way I live my day-to-day life? And if giving a bribe under the table is not sitting right with it's not a mental ideal, but it's more of my aim of life to grow inwardly. If it is not sitting well, I'm not going to do that, even if it means not getting the thing done or waiting for a long period of time. So that has to be an individual decision making. But we are also living in a collective. Collectively, these have to be certain. I think one of the things that is happening right now in India, and I don't pay a lot of attention to day-to-day politics or anything, or even like month-to-month politics, but many of the things that have been done recently, like with the digital economy or removal of the middlemen. So some of the things that were open venues for corruption will be taken care of in a period of time. Like, when you remove the middleman and you directly apply. So I had to get my passport renewed, actually newly made. I took some help from somebody for whose work I had to be somewhere, but and that person has influence, and yet the process was very streamlined. I filled up my application online. I went to the police checkup. The person was very cordial. It all happened very smoothly. And I've heard this from many people. This is something few years back used to take a very, very long time and a cumbersome process. So many things are getting streamlined because of the removal of the middlemen. So collectively also, I think it will take some time.
Right.
But by it's not like 10, 15 years. We are talking much longer phase than that. So by not accepting it at individual level first. But again, this cannot be just through a revolt.
Right.
Because that again can create a whole other problem.
Correct. So in the chapter, judging a culture, you talked about three things. You referred to Sri Aurobindo's 3 points there. Essence of the spiritual essence, the best accomplishment of a society, of a culture, and the power of survival. So what if the third law is at odds with the second? Your best accomplishment can be had with, say, Jugaad. You get what I mean? So if Jugaad becomes the culture, because anyway survival is the primary instinct, somehow adapt, renovate, be alive, But that's not culture.
No. I actually am not very fond of this term jugaad.
Yeah.
And people who say that it's, we should take pride in this ourselves being jugaadu culture, I don't think it's something to be proud of. We have to, Ramayana, Mahabharata, the best of our accomplishments, the best of our, the Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjavur or Gangaikonda, Cholapuram, they were not jugaad things.
Correct.
They were original works of massive, done with massive knowledge, massive scientific, industrial, literary, so many other things, went into it. So Ramayana is not just randomly written, or Mahabharata is not just randomly putting, stories together. So no, I don't think we have to encourage that jugaadu mind too much.
Perhaps the enslavement.
But it was probably necessary because we had some needs. I'm again talking like in post-independence. Huge number. There was a time when India didn't have enough to even feed its people. We are coming from a history of famines and things like that. So white revolution, all those things, green revolution, all those things happened. Then white revolution with Professor Kurian's, the whole Amul revolution and things like that. It was necessary, and yet time has also come to critically look at it. Because green revolution in its wake brought in a lot of problems with seeds. Somebody like, what Vandana Shiva is reminding us constantly through her work. So, biodiversity has been impacted a lot through the Green Revolution. So, in the wake of doing that environmental necessity and using practical reason to solve the problems of the day, we probably have created more problems. And which time is now to take a look at it very critically. So we have to, I don't think those are the best accomplishments Sri Aurobindo is referring to.
Anyway, we had to survive through a dark ages, and we did. So this is something which it's more like a muscle memory that we still are continuing, whereas the necessities of those crushing circumstances have gone away. We need not do that. Correct? So that's also is with the new renaissance, when you talk about the Indian culture, we need to remind ourselves that we are capable of a Brihadeshwara temple. And not merely a jugaad community,
Right. So, my first visit to Matri Mandir was in 1990. There was no gold disc there, just concrete. And I was in awe of what I saw. And I had not seen Brihadeshwara or even Mahabalipuram at that time. I just saw this is what Indians can do by bringing in the best of East and West, right? So this is where I think Mother's work becomes so important in the yoga of the future, because Mother brought in the best of the West, and yet in her soul she was Indian. Sri Aurobindo, in his own intellectual training, brought the best of the West, and in his soul he was entirely Indian, you see? So the future is not about living in two separate parts of the world. The future is integration, harmony.
Correct.
So what we see in Auroville, the emphasis on outer beauty, the emphasis on outer organization, this is not jugaadu. This is all very new, right? Giving a new form to what we were capable of doing earlier. So what we had in Mahabalipuram is, the new form is Matri Mandir, the new cave of meditation or concentration, right?
Correct. You spoke about Sanskriti, Sanskriti not meaning just culture, it also means perfection. What do you think is the role of Prakriti in culture?
So, Prakriti, there in at least bringing Sri Aurobindo's way of looking at it, he uses some words with the capital letter N, like nature as the capital N, or nature, our ordinary nature, right? So Prakriti with the capital N, nature. Nature has to be mastered or conquered, but not in the sense of,
enslaving
it, but rather as to make it a collaborator in creating a better world. But better future, or a better world, or a better humanity. So the powers of nature that have to be harnessed, whether it is wind energy, solar energy, again, so nature, by taking the gifts of the nature, you are creating something new. So, yeah, nature has to become a collaborator in creating that perfect society or the perfect world.
It's not separate.
Yeah, it's not separate, and yet it also cannot be, because see, the same Prakriti, in you and me, it also works through these, what we call in Indian yogic thought as the sattva, rajas, tamas. So these things also have to be mastered. Those powers within us, those gunas within us also have to be harmonized and worked. So some of these movements of nature in us have to be conquered. Not enslaved, but conquered and mastered in that sense.
And you spoke about pursuit of perfection. And while you defined the culture in terms of soul, mind, and body, how would you look at it from the lens of ethical, intellectual, and aesthetic sense? I mean, how would you look at that culture bringing in the intelligence, the scientific advancement, not just art? We usually confine ourselves to arts, right? But we do not look at the social, ethical goods or circumstances, and intellectual, far less emphasis. I mean, slowly we are waking up to the necessity of intelligence as part of Indian culture, which you refer to like rishis were scientists. They were, they had this nice trinity in control of them. However, in today's world, that seems to be a separate stream. It's not a culture. It's as if the industrial world is some other commerce, and how do we integrate it for a new Indian culture?
Yes, it's a very good question. And I think that's where, so it's a little bit of self-disclosure. I spend some time on social media just to kind of get a sense of where the young mind, Indian mind, I follow few handles that are doing some very interesting creative things. So I came across one woman, she has a setup in somewhere in NCR, Delhi NCR. So what she does is she and she has a team of people who collect old bottles, wine, whiskey bottles. In India we had this traditional kabadi wala system, people would give up their bottles. But this woman thought of a very interesting, and it's an industrial work. So they collect these bottles, they bring to this factory. It's a factory setup. And then they convert them into, and people tell them, make glasses out of these bottles, or make flower vases, or planters into these bottles. So she gives them some choices. And in a very industrial setup, they create these new things out of old alcohol or juice bottles. She's
or any
employed,
other waste
or any, So she's employed, I think at least 100 or more than 100 people. And there is a whole delivery setup. Right now it's only in Delhi NCR. And in her Instagram handle, I was reading, people were asking her, can you do this in Jaipur? Can you send these things here? This is the new way of looking at perfection in the outer life, right? Creating something beautiful out of the old. This is just one example. There are many examples like that. The other day I came across another handle, Jeeni Chadariya. So what they are doing is they are going to villages which used to have very strong weaving traditions, but due to the pressures of, power loom and all that, the hand weaving has gone. And this one example that this woman was giving, how these village weavers have relearned the art, and right now they don't have time to fulfill the orders that she's been able to get them. So again, taking the ancient, beautiful craft, or that particular kind of weaving, which was half tussar and half cotton. This particular, I'm forgetting the name of that weave, but in a very industrial factory kind of, or you can call it like an outer life, the outer work. She's been able to bring that out. So it's not that it's not happening. Auroville, of course, is an example, all kinds of industrial units, commercial units. They are working on the same idea. So it's not that this is not happening. We are just not often familiar with.
What I want to know is that, this high science, the patents, the number of research papers, we do a fraction of what Israel does, for that matter.
Yes, that is true.
For 1.4 billion people.
Yeah.
So is it because we do not even recognize this as part of Indian culture, as if this has been outsourced to the West in a way?
No, I don't think, well, it was not the case. We've just seen that.
Yeah, exactly.
It was not the case, but if it has come to our understanding, that's a problem. We need to correct that. We have been more like what somebody says, the data provider, and the theories will be made by the West, or we will give them the menial labor, and the patents will be, held by the Western scientists. That has to change. If that is still the case, I don't know. I'm not much familiar with the scientific research, the new things that are coming up, but certainly it should no longer be. We have to have, it's not enough to say, Google's CEO is of Indian origin, or Microsoft CEO. We have to have our own Google. We have to have our own Microsoft, So there is something, I think, that happened, which from Sri Aurobindo's explanations of Indian culture we can understand, that at some point in our cultural evolution, we began to give more importance to ascetic turning of the mind. And we thought less, that this kind of outer work was less important. And that probably the baggage of that is still there. We need to get rid of that. And as very rationally I'm saying, this is our rational critique of our culture. If we have somehow understood our culture as to be only about the inner perfection and not about outer perfection, we need to change that.
Super. You spoke about this, East versus West. And in general sense, when we say East, we consider Indic thoughts, and when we say West, we consider this far away, as if it's in Europe, However, to my mind, I think it's 50-50 within India.
Oh, more than that, probably.
No, because if you do not just look at India as India, it's a cultural India which starts from Afghanistan to say Burma. We have most populous Pakistan and say Bangladesh, which follow an Western thought, Abrahamic in a way. So there are a lot of dualities there which we need to somehow harmonize, synthesize. So there is this Brahmanic versus Abrahamic thought. We have this, unity versus uniform kind of thoughts. We have monotheism versus multitheism. And then we have various other such dualities which we need to overcome. The individual versus collective. How do you think we can find a modern India which unifies these two dualities, which is very much part of, in terms of population also, perhaps it's equal. It's not, often we consider West as a minority if you consider it's 15-16% for Hindu majority. However, if you put this as an Indic civilization, it's equal. It's 50-50 almost. Right. Correct?
Yeah, very true.
So it's in a way, like you said, this is a challenge. However, it's a great opportunity to use this to reverse the trend. Can we use this opportunity to reach out, reverse the trend, this trend that started to spread? In a way, we make it go the other way. Is it possible? With the modern Indian mind.
Yeah. So just one thing about the Brahmanical thing. In fact, that's the term, and Sri Aurobindo speaks about that. Since we are talking of this series of essays, a rationalistic critic on Indian culture, there is one passage where he says that when the rationalistic mind says that India is a Brahmanical civilization, we need to understand what this Brahmanical civilization is. It is the civilization that puts the pursuit of Brahman as the highest.
Not the Brahmins.
Not the Brahmin
no,
as that
not at all.
Brahmin.
I didn't mean it that way.
Right. So we need to just kind of like have it on record to say that.
Correct.
I think if we were to actually make India again a Brahmanical civilization, in that sense of the word, we can have many of these problems resolved by themselves. Because no matter whether one is believing in polytheism or monotheism, whether you keep murtis of Ram, Krishna, Ganesh, Lakshmi on your altar, or you read Quran and do not believe in any idol worship. If you think that by doing my 5 times prayer in a day, I am seeking that highest Brahman, and you do it with all sincerity, you can coexist with the one who has 5 Devi Devatas on her altar, right? But the fact that somehow we thought that these two things cannot coexist, which is where Sri Aurobindo calls it clearly a falsehood, because that is not a truth of the spirit. If the truth of the spirit was everybody one way of seeking the divine, then why this whole diversity? See, as an Aurobindonian, we also look at how the problems begin. This is also a problem of the overmind. Which is where multiplicity reigns. Supermind is that beyond. One truth, right? You know, that is beyond. That is where the oneness begins to come in. So, though the truth is, the highest truth is the Sachidananda, but that's the unknowable, the unthinkable. But supermind is where the oneness begins to flow in manifestation. Right? So supermind is this dynamic Sachidananda, if you call it. So now that consciousness is working, the way I see it, a lot of chaos that we are seeing it between Abrahamic versus non-Abrahamic, or in our own country, uniform civil code or no uniform civil code, you know, all kinds of things. This is just an outer working out of the inner truth, which will, and I don't even know which side I'm on. I haven't explored this in detail. Whether uniform civil code will be good for India or not, I don't know. Time will tell. But maybe for some short period of time, some uniformity might be necessary. As you read that first stream again, and you'll say, in whatever way unity comes about, in whatever practical way, that must be the case. Right. So for some period of time, we may need some uniformity, because we are going with you know, the times. We are still in the mental and over-mental worlds. Yeah. But ultimately, if we hold on to that, and again, I think for us Aurobindonians, we have to hold on to the truth. We have to choose that truth that has been given to us by Sri Aurobindo and the mother, which is the truth of the supermind. So, which is what I guess Auroville was also trying to aspire towards.
Right. I mean, when we are coming out of this old clutches and going towards a new India, I think Sri Aurobindo's India kind of takes more relevance.
Yes, yes.
When you say this as to an Aurobindonian mind, there is no clash, no?
Yes, yes.
So
we just see it as like work in process, work in progress. And I think it goes back to the same question. The politicians, politics and finance, Sri Aurobindo said, would be the last 2 areas to be supramentalized. So the problems are more of the politics and finance, the whole economic chaos in the world. Right. You know, that's also the last to be touched. And again, we go back to Mother's reminder that how would money be taken out from the Asuric forces and turned towards divine uses, because she brings up that money cannot be, the money force cannot be conquered if you conquer another important falsehood, which is sex. The, not just, you know, individual level, but at a collective level. Again, when you see this in the world, how the popular culture is promoting the unbridled pursuit of sensual satisfaction through all popular culture. That's where, you know, see all the money is I mean, you see in Netflix all kinds of the weapons, the human trafficking for sexual perversions, and money. All these 3 forces, they are the 3 asuras that have to be conquered all at the same time. As Mother says, to change anything, you have to change everything. Only supermind can do that. So we have to hold on to that fast, this lifetime and next several lifetimes.
So, like you also referred to Sri Aurobindo referring often to the future, though he is he is invoking the past, he is reading the text, but he is talking about the future.
Yeah.
In this, what is, the way I see it, it's also, like you also referred to, religio-philosophical versus, practical reasoning kind of world, the duality there. Do you think there is a clash between intelligence and intuition? Because future is all you do not know. It's an intuitive step. And intelligence is based on collecting evidence, the past trend, and, it's all about seeing the trajectory.
Yes. So
it's in a way backward looking, and intuition is more forward looking. However, one is fed on the other, no?
So intellect is, as Sri Aurobindo gives you the gradations of the mind, intellect or reason comes with the mind. Beyond mind first is the higher mind. That's the first opening to something beyond mind. Then comes the illumined, and then comes the intuitive. So intuitive is still pretty high up.
Okay.
Intuitive is where you begin to see flashes of truth that is yet to be unfolded. So Sri Aurobindo in his synthesis of yoga speaks about that all parts within us have their own intuitive faculty. So there is a physical intuition, there is a vital intuition, there is a mental intuition, and there is also an integral intuition. So that would be the true faculty to develop. And that is the faculty of the future. To be ready for the supramental world, to be able to see truth. And even illumined mind, Sri Aurobindo says, the best poets, the best artists often operate from that. They'll see some vision and they'll express it. Dev Smita would know. It just happens.
In life also, when you follow your first thought, which is intuitive, but then you use your mind,
Yeah.
that one goes wrong.
Yes.
It's very spontaneous and something very clear.
Yes.
Than the mind which is reasoning.
Right. So, and yet there is this beauty in Sri Aurobindo that you cannot skip any stage. Some people, with their prior preparation, like Sri Ramakrishna, who did not have any formal mental, intellectual training, and yet he was living in that Brahmic consciousness. But for a majority of people, you have to go through these development of mind also. You cannot skip the stage of developing your reason and intellect. Because even the intuition to express that, you have to have the right faculty, the right language. We are marveling at Sri Aurobindo's words because he had that super brilliant intellect to express it. So.
Right. I have so many questions to ask.
Yeah.
I've been told that the time is getting over.
It's become like a really long satsang on Sri Aurobindo's writings.
Yeah, perhaps we should, because I have, a few things to further lead our discussion on. Darshan was a very interesting notion also, the role of Shastras and revival of Shastras in a way. And you touched upon the invasion of material riches, which is a Western, has been the Western approach of the few centuries. And how do we not follow that path, which we seem to have been walking on?
Yeah,
and
we have to invade culturally, which is what the Indian way was. We had up to the Cambodia and Indonesia, and
So, is there anything else? There are. Finally, if you can touch upon the challenges to Indian culture in contemporary sense, and then maybe we can.
Yeah, I think just the one thing is that when we are trying to go through this process of decolonization of mind and decolonization of, to kind of start new, we are not starting new. India is not a new nation, Sri Aurobindo says. We are a very old civilization. But we have to always remember that we are not recreating the old. This is what I see a lot of attempts today, those who are who are talking a lot about decolonization or reviving the past, whether it is, for example, the form of Gurukul. We cannot be just living in an age where there are just Vedic Gurukuls and then modern CBSE, ICSE schools, right? So we have to create new Gurukuls which is where the kind of integral education experiments that we see, whether it's in the ashram or Auroville, those are the new forms that we have to create. We cannot be okay, so for example, this one thing that I really find so beautiful in Matri Mandir, the way the things are set up. There is Sri Aurobindo's symbol, and there is very clear guidelines, no ritual, no pranam, nothing like that, no outer expression. It's all about inner. This is where we are moving towards future. It's not about disrespecting the past. All the dhoop agarbatti was very important, and I still do it because it helps me. But I do not have to claim that at a place which is meant to be for universal spirituality. So we are living in an age of universal spirituality. If some outer forms have to be given up, so be it. Whether it is from one community or the other, right? So you cannot just say that I am going to, wear my kripan while going through, security check in an airport because that is what my dharma says. But there are other, problems that can come with it.
Correct.
So some outer forms we need to be ready to give up. As Sri Aurobindo says categorically, the caste system has to go. Says somebody asked him a question about widow remarriage, some correspondent from Hindu, and he said, any form that came up in the time, any social, cultural form that came up at the time when India was going through a period of decay, probably the time has come to let go of that. Because what matters is not just whether you allow widow remarriage or this marriage or that, but whether all women are given equal opportunity to blossom into their full individuality. So outer forms are decided by policymakers, but the inner truth has to be looked into it. Yeah, that is what we have to hold on to. So I think that's the new India.
On that thought, thank you, Dr. Beloo Mehra. Thanks for the beautiful time.
Thank you so much. Thank you for indulging and asking such brilliant questions, really.
Thank you for also not ducking it.
No.
See you tomorrow, 10:30, with another session, convention session on Invocation 2023. Thank you.